December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor burns. The United States Pacific Fleet lies shattered in the Hawaiian waters, and with it, the confidence of American naval aviation. But the real nightmare hasn't even begun yet. In the months that follow, American pilots will face something far more terrifying than the surprise attack itself. The Mitsubishi A6M-0, a fighter plane that seems almost supernatural in its capabilities. In the skies over the Pacific, young American aviators are dying at a rate that makes even hardened admirals lose sleep. The kill ratio is devastating. For every Japanese plane shot down, 3 or 4 American fighters fall from the sky in flames. Pilots who survive their first encounter with a Zero rarely survive their second. The question burning through every ready room, every briefing, every desperate radio transmission is simple and terrifying. How do you fight an enemy you cannot beat? Lieutenant Commander John Smith Thatch sits in his office at Naval Air Station San Diego, staring at another casualty report. Jimmy, as everyone calls him, is 37 years old, a veteran naval aviator with over a decade of experience. His face is weathered, his eyes carry the weight of too many funerals, and his mind refuses to accept what the reports keep telling him. Good pilots, men he trained personally, are being slaughtered in the Pacific. The official line from command is always the same: pilot error, bad luck, need for better training. But Thack knows better. He has flown the Grumman F-4F Wildcat, the frontline American fighter. He has studied every combat report, every debriefing, every scrap of intelligence about the Zero. And the conclusion is inescapable and terrifying. In a one-on-one fight, the Zero is simply superior. The numbers tell a brutal story. The Mitsubishi A6M-0 weighs just over 4,000 pounds empty. The American F-4F Wildcat weighs nearly 6,000 pounds. The Zero can turn inside the Wildcat's turning radius with ease. It climbs faster, maneuvers more quickly, and in the hands of Japan's experienced naval pilots it becomes a killing machine. The Zero's construction is lightweight, almost fragile by American standards, built for maximum agility at the expense of armor and pilot protection. Japanese designers made a calculated trade, survivability for performance, and in the early months of the war, that trade pays devastating dividends. American pilots find themselves in aircraft that feel sluggish and unresponsive compared to their adversaries. The Wildcat has advantages, certainly. It is rugged, can absorb tremendous punishment, and its .650 caliber machine guns pack more firepower than the Zero's lighter armament. But none of those advantages matter if you cannot get into firing position, and against a Zero in a turning fight, the Wildcat simply cannot compete. American doctrine, developed over decades of peacetime exercises and theoretical war games, emphasizes individual pilot skill and one-on-one combat. Fighter pilots are trained to be lone wolves, to seek out enemy aircraft and engage them in single combat. It is a doctrine born from Romanticism, from the legacy of World War I aces, from the belief that American fighting spirit and individual excellence will always prevail. The training emphasizes aggressive pursuit, gaining altitude advantage, diving on the enemy, and using superior gunnery to achieve victory. These tactics work beautifully in exercises against other American aircraft. They work in war games, where both sides fly similar planes with similar capabilities. Against the Zero, this doctrine is a death sentence. American pilots engage exactly as they were trained, and they die exactly as the doctrine predicts they should not. Thatch reads the names. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, shot down over Wake Island during the desperate defense of that tiny atoll. Ensign Michael Patterson, killed defending the carrier Lexington from Japanese attack. His Wildcat last seen spinning into the ocean trailing fire. Lieutenant Junior Grade Thomas Morrison reported missing after an engagement near Rabaul, his wingman watching helplessly as a Zero shot him to pieces. Lieutenant David Chen, killed over the Philippines in the war's first weeks. Ensign William O'Brien, shot down protecting the retreat from Java. The list goes on and on, each name a story cut short, each death a failure of doctrine that no one in command seems willing to acknowledge. These are not statistics. These are men he knew, men he taught to fly, men who trusted that their training would keep them alive. The weight of their deaths sits heavy on his shoulders, a burden that grows with each new casualty report that crosses his desk. There has to be a solution. There has to be a way to fight back. The alternative is unthinkable, that American pilots will simply continue dying until there are none left, until the Pacific belongs entirely to Japan, until the war is lost before it truly begins. Thach cannot accept that. He will not accept that. Somewhere in the physics of aerial combat, in the geometry of pursuit and evasion, in the mathematics of speed and turning radius, there must be an answer. The Zero's advantages are fixed, determined by its design and construction. The Wildcat's limitations are equally fixed. But tactics, doctrine, the way pilots fight, those things can change. Those things must change. Night after night, Thach stays late in his office, surrounded by reports and diagrams and photographs of wreckage. His wife worries. His colleagues suggest he is taking the losses too personally, that he needs rest, that obsessing over tactical problems is not healthy. But Thach cannot rest. Sleep brings dreams of burning aircraft and falling pilots. Waking brings the reality of more casualty reports. Somewhere in these documents, in the patterns of combat, in the descriptions of how Zeros attack and how American pilots die, there must be an answer. He reads accounts from survivors, men who managed to escape Zero attacks through luck or desperation. He studies gun camera footage when available, watching the jerky black and white images of combat. He interviews pilots on leave from the Pacific, asking them to describe every detail of their encounters with Japanese fighters. The Zero's advantages are clear: speed, agility, turning radius, rate of climb. The Wildcat's advantages are fewer but real: rugged construction, better armor, heavier firepower, ability to dive faster due to greater weight. But none of that matters in a turning fight, and every combat report describes the same scenario. American pilot spots Zero, engages, tries to turn with it, gets outmaneuvered, takes fire, goes down. The pattern repeats with mechanical, horrifying consistency. American pilots are brave, skilled, well-trained. They follow their doctrine precisely, and they die. The problem is not the pilots. The problem is the doctrine itself, a doctrine that assumes rough parity between opposing aircraft, a doctrine that has not adapted to the reality of facing a superior enemy. Then one night in early 1942, exhausted and frustrated, Thach has a realization that changes everything. He is staring at a diagram of a dogfight, trying to visualize the three-dimensional chess game of aerial combat, when the thought hits him with the force of revelation. We cannot win alone. The entire American fighter doctrine is built on the assumption that individual pilots will engage individual enemies. Wingmen exist in doctrine, but they are treated as secondary, supporting elements. The real fight, the decisive moment, is always portrayed as pilot versus pilot, aircraft versus aircraft, individual skill versus individual skill. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if the solution is not to make each pilot better at solo combat, but to make pilots fight together in a way that turns individual weakness into collective strength? The idea is so simple, so obvious in hindsight, that Thach wonders why no one has thought of it before. Or perhaps others have thought of it and dismissed it as impractical or contrary to fighter-pilot culture. But Thach cannot dismiss it. The idea takes hold in his mind with the intensity of revelation. Two fighters working together not as leader and wingman but as equal partners in a coordinated dance, each protecting the other, each creating opportunities for the other, the whole becoming greater than the sum of its parts. It goes against everything fighter pilots are taught about independence and individual initiative. It requires trust, coordination, discipline, but it might work. It might actually work. Thach grabs a box of matches from his desk drawer. He pulls out several matchsticks and begins arranging them on his desk, using them to represent aircraft. 2 matchsticks for American fighters, moving forward in parallel paths. Enemy matchsticks approaching from behind, the classic attack scenario that has killed so many American pilots. In the traditional response, each American fighter would break off and engage separately, turning to face the threat, each pilot relying on his own skill to survive. Thach has seen how that ends. But what if they do something different? He moves the 2 American matchsticks in a crossing pattern, weaving back and forth across each other's paths like threads on a loom. When an enemy matchstick pursues one American, the other American crosses behind and attacks the pursuer. The pattern creates a deadly trap. Any enemy that commits to attacking one American fighter immediately exposes itself to fire from the other. Thatch stares at the matchsticks, his heart racing. The pattern looks like weaving, like the crossing threads of fabric on a loom. It is simple, elegant, and potentially revolutionary. Two fighters, flying in coordinated pairs, crossing paths in a defensive weave. When one is attacked, he turns toward his wingman. The wingman turns toward him. They pass each other, and the wingman is now behind the attacker in perfect firing position. The enemy pilot, focused on his target, suddenly finds himself the target. The maneuver turns defense into offense, transforms pursuit into ambush, converts individual vulnerability into mutual protection. The beauty of it is that it does not require superior aircraft performance. The Wildcat does not need to outturn the Zero. It just needs to be in the right place at the right time, and the weave pattern ensures that. Thatch works through the geometry carefully. The crossing angle needs to be steep enough to bring the wingman into firing position quickly, but not so steep that the two aircraft risk collision. The timing needs to be precise, both pilots turning at the same moment, trusting each other to be where they are supposed to be. The communication needs to be clear and instantaneous. But none of these requirements are impossible. They just require practice, discipline, and trust. For the first time in months, Thatch feels something other than despair. This could work. This could actually work. The Wildcat's disadvantages in turning radius do not matter if the fight is not about outturning the enemy, but about creating crossfire. The Zero's advantages become liabilities if its pilot commits to a pursuit that leads into a trap. Thatch spends the rest of the night working out the details, sketching diagrams, calculating angles and speeds and timing. He considers different scenarios. What if there are multiple attackers? The weave can expand, multiple pairs weaving together, creating a defensive barrier that is difficult to penetrate. What if the attackers come from different directions? The pairs can adjust their weave pattern, always ensuring mutual support. What if one aircraft is damaged? The healthy aircraft can tighten the weave, providing extra protection. The more Thatch explores the concept, the more convinced he becomes that it is sound. By dawn, he has a complete tactical doctrine written out, ready to present to his superiors. He calls it the beam defense position, a formal name that might appeal to the conservative instincts of naval command. But in his mind, he thinks of it as the weave, a simple name for a simple but revolutionary idea. The presentation to Naval Command does not go as Thatch hoped. The conference room at Naval Air Station North Island is filled with senior officers, men with decades of experience and rows of ribbons on their chests. These are the men who have shaped naval aviation doctrine, who have trained generations of pilots, who have built their careers on the established principles of fighter combat. Thatch stands at the front, diagrams pinned to a board behind him, and explains his concept. Two fighters in mutual support, crossing patterns, defensive weave creating offensive opportunities. He shows the matchstick demonstration, moving the small wooden sticks across the table to illustrate how the maneuver works. He walks through combat scenarios, explaining how the weave neutralizes the Zero's advantages. He presents the mathematics, the geometry, the tactical logic. The room is silent when he finishes. Then the objections begin. Too complex. That is the first response, delivered by Commander Harrison, a veteran of the previous war who flew biplanes over the Western Front. Harrison shakes his head slowly, the gesture of a patient teacher correcting a well-meaning but misguided student. In the chaos of combat, he explains, with adrenaline pumping and bullets flying and aircraft maneuvering in 3 dimensions at high speed, pilots will not be able to execute such a complicated maneuver. They will collide with each other. They will lose track of the enemy. They will panic and break formation. Fighter combat is fast, violent, and confusing. Asking pilots to maintain precise coordination while being shot at is asking the impossible. Harrison speaks from experience, from memories of dogfights over France where survival meant quick reactions and individual skill. Thatch tries to explain that the maneuver is actually quite simple once practiced, that it becomes instinctive with training, that the coordination required is no more complex than formation flying, which every pilot already masters. But Harrison cuts him off. Simple on paper, he says with finality, is not simple in combat. Non-orthodox. That is the second objection, delivered by Captain Morrison with barely concealed disdain. Morrison is a product of the Naval Academy, a man who believes deeply in tradition and established procedure. The Navy, he explains, has developed fighter tactics over decades. Those tactics are based on proven principles: altitude advantage, speed, aggressive pursuit, individual initiative. What Thach is proposing throws all of that away in favor of some untested theory. It violates the fundamental principles of fighter combat that have been validated through years of training and exercises. It turns aggressive pursuit into defensive maneuvering. It makes pilots dependent on each other rather than self-reliant. Morrison's voice carries the weight of institutional authority. We do not change doctrine based on one officer's hunch, no matter how many matchsticks he arranges on his desk. The comment draws a few chuckles from around the table, and Thach feels his face flush with anger and embarrassment. But the most damning objection comes from Admiral Kelly, the senior officer present and the man whose opinion will ultimately determine whether Thach's proposal receives any consideration. Kelly listens to the debate with the patience of a man who has sat through countless briefings and heard countless proposals. When he finally speaks, his voice is quiet but carries absolute authority. American pilots, he says, are the best in the world. They are trained to be aggressive, independent, skilled individual fighters. That is what makes them American. That is what distinguishes them from the enemy. The solution to the zero problem is not to abandon what makes American pilots great. The solution is better training, more practice, improved gunnery, superior tactics within the existing framework. American pilots should win through individual excellence, not through coordinated tricks that sound more like desperation than strategy. The implication is clear and cutting. Thach's proposal is not just wrong, it is almost insulting, suggesting that American pilots need gimmicks to compete with the Japanese, implying that American fighting spirit and skill are insufficient. Kelly continues, his tone almost gentle, as if he is trying to let Thach down easy. The Navy appreciates innovative thinking, he says. Officers who question established doctrine and propose new ideas are valuable. But there is a difference between innovation and desperation, between tactical evolution and throwing away proven principles because of early setbacks. The war is young. American pilots are still learning to fight this enemy. As they gain experience, as they learn the Zero's weaknesses, as they develop better tactics within the existing framework, the casualty rates will improve. What is needed is patience, training, and confidence in American fighting spirit. Not radical changes to fundamental doctrine based on theoretical maneuvers that have never been tested in actual combat. Thach leaves the meeting frustrated and angry. He knows he is right. The combat reports prove it. The casualty lists prove it. Every week brings more dead pilots, more aircraft lost, more evidence that the current doctrine is failing. But institutional inertia is a powerful force, and the Navy's fighter doctrine is built on decades of tradition and peacetime assumptions. Challenging that doctrine, no matter how necessary, marks him as a troublemaker, a maverick, someone who does not understand how things are done. In the days that follow, Thach feels the subtle isolation that comes with being right too early. Colleagues who once sought his advice now avoid him in the hallways. Superiors who valued his input now treat him with cool formality. He has committed the cardinal sin of military bureaucracy. He has suggested that the established way might be wrong. And worse, he has done so in a way that makes those who defend the established way look foolish or negligent. The whispers follow him. Thach has lost his nerve. Thach is too affected by the casualties. Thach is proposing defensive tactics because he is afraid to fight aggressively. None of it is true, but perception matters in military culture, and the perception is that Thach has stepped out of line. Some officers are more direct in their criticism. One tells him bluntly that his proposal makes American pilots sound weak, that it suggests they cannot win fair fights. Another suggests that Thach is suffering from stress and should take leave. A third, more sympathetic, advises him to drop the issue and focus on conventional training, warning that continued advocacy for the weave maneuver will damage his career. But the casualties keep mounting. Every week brings new reports from the Pacific. Zeros continue to dominate the skies over the Philippines, over Java, over New Guinea, over the Coral Sea. American pilots continue to die, following their doctrine precisely, engaging aggressively, fighting individually, and losing. The names pile up in Thach's mind. A growing list of men who might have lived if the Navy had been willing to try something new. And Thach cannot let it go. He cannot accept that his idea, which makes so much sense tactically, which addresses the specific problem of the Zero's superiority, should be dismissed because it challenges tradition. If command will not authorize his maneuver, if the admirals will not change doctrine, then he will do what he can within his own sphere of influence. He is the commanding officer of Fighting Squadron 3, VF-3, assigned to the carrier USS Lexington, and later transferred to USS Yorktown. His squadron, his responsibility, his men. If he cannot change the entire Navy, he can at least try to keep his own pilots alive. Thach begins training VF-3 in the weave without official authorization. He does not advertise it. He does not send reports up the chain of command describing the unorthodox tactics he is teaching. He simply incorporates it into the squadron's practice flights, presenting it as an experimental tactic, something to try, a tool in the toolbox. Some of his pilots are skeptical. The maneuver feels wrong, counterintuitive. When attacked, every instinct screams to break away, to maneuver independently, to rely on your own skill, turning toward your wingman, trusting him to be in position, flying a coordinated pattern while under fire. All of it goes against their training and their instincts. But Thach is patient and persistent. He flies the maneuver himself, demonstrating it again and again. He pairs pilots together, building trust and coordination. He explains the tactical logic, walking them through scenarios, showing them how the weave creates opportunities and eliminates vulnerabilities. Slowly, grudgingly, the squadron begins to master the weave. They practice it at different altitudes, different speeds, different angles. They practice with 2 aircraft, then 4, then 6, building complex weaving patterns that create defensive barriers. They practice communication, developing shorthand calls that allow instant coordination. They practice until the maneuver becomes instinctive, until the pilots stop thinking about it consciously and simply react, trusting their training and their wingman. Ensign Ram Dib becomes Thach's primary wingman. Dib is young, 23 years old, with less than a year of combat experience. He has a baby face that makes him look even younger, and a calm demeanor that serves him well under pressure. But he is smart, learns quickly, and most importantly, he is willing to trust his commander completely. Thach and Dib practice the weave until it becomes second nature. They fly it at dawn and dusk, in clear weather and clouds, at high altitude and low. They practice the timing, the crossing angles, the communication. They develop an almost telepathic understanding, each knowing instinctively where the other will be, what the other will do. Thach emphasizes repeatedly that the maneuver only works if both pilots commit completely. Hesitation, doubt, individual improvisation, any of those will break the pattern and leave both pilots vulnerable. The weave requires absolute trust. Your life depends on your wingman, and his life depends on you. That trust must be total and unquestioning. By May of 1942, VF-3 has been reassigned to the carrier USS Yorktown. The strategic situation in the Pacific is desperate. Japan has conquered vast territories: the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, much of New Guinea. The Japanese advance seems unstoppable, a tide of conquest that threatens to engulf the entire Pacific. American forces have fought delaying actions, won minor victories, but nothing has stopped the overall Japanese momentum. American intelligence, however, has achieved a crucial breakthrough. Cryptanalysts have broken Japanese naval codes and intercepted communications indicating a major operation planned for early June, targeting Midway Atoll. Midway is a tiny speck of land in the vast Pacific, but its strategic importance is enormous. If Midway falls, Hawaii itself could be threatened, and the entire American position in the Pacific could collapse. The Pacific Fleet, still recovering from Pearl Harbor, prepares for what may be the decisive battle of the war. Every available carrier, every aircraft, every pilot is mobilized. The odds are not in America's favor. The Japanese fleet is larger, more experienced, and equipped with the dreaded Zero. Japanese carriers have been operating continuously since the war began, their pilots veterans of multiple campaigns. American carriers are undermanned, their air groups still training, their pilots largely inexperienced in combat. But there is no choice. Midway must be defended. If the Japanese take Midway, the road to Hawaii is open. If Hawaii falls, the war in the Pacific is effectively lost. Everything depends on the coming battle. Thatch briefs his squadron aboard Yorktown as the carrier steams toward Midway. The mood is tense. Everyone knows this is not a routine patrol or a minor skirmish. This is the battle that will determine whether America can hold the Pacific or whether Japanese expansion will continue unchecked. The briefing room is crowded, pilots sitting on every available surface, the air thick with cigarette smoke and nervous energy. Thatch stands at the front, a map of Midway behind him, and speaks calmly about their mission. They will fly combat air patrol, protecting the American carriers from Japanese attack. They will likely face Zeros, probably in superior numbers. Their job is to keep those Zeros away from the carriers, to buy time for the dive bombers and torpedo planes to strike the Japanese fleet. Thatch reminds his pilots of their training, of the tactics they have practiced. He does not call it the weave in the official briefing, does not mention that it is unauthorized doctrine that command rejected. He simply tells them, stay with your wingman, trust each other. When you are attacked, turn toward your partner. We fight together, or we die alone. Some of the pilots nod, understanding. They have practiced this. They know what to do. Others look uncertain, still uncomfortable with tactics that go against their training. All of them are afraid, though none will admit it. Fear is natural, Thatch tells them. Fear keeps you alert, keeps you sharp. But do not let fear make you break formation. Do not let fear make you fight alone. Trust your wingman. Trust your training. Trust the tactics. They have worked in practice. They will work in combat. June 4th, 1942. Dawn breaks over the Pacific, and Yorktown launches her aircraft. The flight deck is organized chaos. Aircraft spotted and launched in rapid succession. Engines roaring, propellers spinning, deck crews scrambling. Thatch leads VF-3 into the sky, 6 Wildcats climbing into the morning light. The aircraft feel heavy, sluggish with full fuel and ammunition. The Wildcat is not a graceful aircraft, not like the sleek Zero. It is a blunt instrument, tough and reliable, but lacking elegance. Thatch settles into his cockpit, running through his checks, feeling the familiar vibration of the engine, the stick in his hand, the rudder pedals under his feet. This is where he belongs, in the air, leading his men, about to put his theories to the ultimate test. The radio is alive with chatter, reports of Japanese carriers spotted to the northwest, dive bombers launching from Enterprise and Hornet, torpedo planes heading out on their attack runs. The battle has begun. Thatch's mission is combat air patrol, protecting the American carriers from Japanese attack. He leads his formation in a wide circle above the fleet, eyes scanning the horizon, knowing that somewhere out there, Zeros are hunting. The sky is clear, visibility unlimited, a beautiful day for flying and a terrible day for dying. Thatch checks his formation. Dib is on his wing, exactly where he should be. The other 4 Wildcats are paired up, flying the weave pattern loosely, ready to tighten it instantly if attacked. The radio crackles. Bandits inbound, bearing 270, Angels 12. Enemy aircraft approaching from the west at 12,000 feet. Thatch's heart rate increases, but his voice stays calm. Roger. Tally-ho. He banks the formation toward the threat, climbing for altitude advantage. The Wildcat climbs slowly, painfully slowly compared to a Zero, but they have time. Thatch scans the sky, searching for the telltale glint of sunlight on canopy or wing. Then he sees them, a formation of Japanese aircraft, and above them, the distinctive silhouettes of Zeros, flying escort. The Zero is beautiful in its way, elegant and deadly, a thoroughbred compared to the Wildcat's workhorse. Thatch counts quickly. At least 6 Zeros, maybe more. Difficult to tell with the sun behind them. His formation has 6 Wildcats. Even odds numerically, but the Zeros have altitude and the advantage of superior aircraft. In a traditional engagement, this would be a bloodbath. American pilots would engage individually, try to outturn the Zeros, and die one by one. Thatch makes his decision in seconds. He splits his formation into 3 pairs, each pair flying the weave pattern. He takes Dib as his wingman. The other 4 pilots pair up as they have practiced. They climb toward the Zeros, not in a scattered individual attack, but in coordinated pairs, each pair weaving back and forth across each other's path. The pattern is loose now, the aircraft separated by several hundred feet, but ready to tighten instantly. The Zeros see them coming and dive to attack. This is the moment of truth. Everything Thatch has theorized, everything he has practiced, Everything he has been rejected and ridiculed for comes down to the next few minutes. If the weave fails, if his pilots die because he taught them wrong tactics, he will never forgive himself. But if it works, if they survive, if they win, then everything changes. A Zero latches onto Thach's tail. The Japanese pilot is good, experienced, confident. He has done this dozens of times before, shooting down American fighters that try futilely to outturn him. The American fighter ahead of him is slower, less maneuverable, exactly the kind of target he has killed before. This should be an easy kill. He closes the distance, lining up his shot, finger tightening on the trigger. The American fighter is in his sights, range decreasing just a few more seconds. Then something happens that he has never seen before. The American fighter does not break away or try to outturn him. Instead, it turns directly toward another American plane approaching from the side. The two American fighters cross paths, and suddenly the Zero pilot realizes his mistake. The other American fighter is now directly behind him, guns blazing. He has flown into a trap. Dib's .50 caliber machine guns tear into the Zero. 6 heavy machine guns, each firing 800 rounds per minute, create a stream of lead that no aircraft can survive. The Japanese fighter shudders under the impact, pieces of aluminum skin tearing away, smoke pouring from its engine. The Zero pilot tries to break away, hauling back on the stick, trying to use his superior maneuverability to escape. But it is too late. The damage is catastrophic. The engine seizes, flames erupt from the cowling, and the Zero rolls inverted and plunges toward the ocean 3 miles below. First kill. Dib's voice comes over the radio, excited and breathless. Got him, Skipper. Thach does not have time to celebrate or even acknowledge. Another Zero is diving on Dib now, and it is Thach's turn to execute the maneuver. Thach turns hard toward Dib, their aircraft crossing in the weave pattern. The geometry works exactly as he calculated on paper. The Zero pilot, focused on Dib, does not see Thach coming until tracers flash past his canopy. Thach's guns find their mark, walking up the Zero's fuselage from tail to cockpit. The Japanese fighter breaks apart in midair, the lightweight construction that gives it such agility also making it fragile under fire. Pieces of wing and fuselage tumble toward the sea. The pilot never had a chance to bail out. Second kill in less than a minute. The weave is working. It is actually working. The remaining Zeros are confused. This is not how American fighters are supposed to behave. They are supposed to scatter, to fight individually, to be easy prey for superior Japanese aircraft and pilots. Instead, these Americans are flying in some kind of coordinated pattern that turns every attack into a trap. A third Zero tries to break the pattern, diving with tremendous speed to catch one of the Americans before the weave can form. The pilot is aggressive, skilled, determined, but Thach and Dib have practiced this scenario. They tighten their weave, crossing paths more frequently, creating a defensive barrier that the Zero cannot penetrate without exposing itself. The Japanese pilot makes his run, guns firing, but he cannot hold his attack long enough to score hits. As he flashes past, Thach turns hard and gets a burst into the Zero's tail. Not enough to destroy it, but enough to damage it, smoke trailing from the engine. The Zero pilot, frustrated and running low on ammunition, breaks off and flees toward the Japanese fleet. The engagement lasts less than 10 minutes but feels like hours. Time dilates in combat, seconds stretching into eternities, the mind processing information at impossible speed. When it is over, Thach and Dib are still flying, their aircraft damaged but airborne. Thach's Wildcat has bullet holes stitching the wing. A Zero got a burst into him during one of the crossings, but nothing vital was hit. Dib's aircraft is similarly damaged, the rugged Wildcat absorbing punishment that would have destroyed a Zero. 2 Zeros are confirmed destroyed, falling into the ocean. A third is damaged and fleeing. The others have withdrawn, unwilling to continue the engagement against tactics they do not understand. For the first time in the Pacific War, American fighters have met Zeros in combat and won decisively, not through luck or superior numbers, but through superior tactics. Thach's hands are shaking on the control stick, adrenaline flooding his system. The maneuver worked. The crazy, rejected, non-orthodox maneuver actually worked. Everything he theorized with matchsticks on his desk, everything he practiced with his squadron, everything command said was too complex and too desperate, it all worked exactly as he predicted. Dib's voice comes over the radio, breathless and exhilarated. "Skipper, we got them. We actually got them. I can't believe it worked." Thatch allows himself a moment of satisfaction, a grim smile behind his oxygen mask. It worked because the tactics are sound, because the geometry is correct, because two aircraft working together are more than twice as effective as two aircraft working alone. It worked because he refused to accept that American pilots had to die, refused to accept that the Zero was unbeatable, refused to let institutional resistance stop him from trying to save lives. They returned to Yorktown, landing on the carrier's deck with fuel tanks nearly empty and bullet holes stitching their fuselages. The deck crew swarms the aircraft, counting the damage, marveling that both planes made it back. Thatch climbs out of his cockpit, legs unsteady, and finds himself surrounded by other pilots, all talking at once, asking what happened, how they did it, what was that maneuver. Word spreads through the ship with incredible speed. Thatch and Dib fought Zeros and won, not through luck, not through superior aircraft, but through tactics, through coordination, through the maneuver that command said was too complex, too non-orthodox, too crazy to work. Pilots who have been flying combat missions for months, who have lost friends to Zeros, who have felt helpless against the superior Japanese fighters, suddenly have hope. There is a way to fight back. There is a way to win. The debriefing is intense. Intelligence officers want every detail. What was the maneuver? How does it work? Can it be taught? Can other squadrons use it? Thatch explains the weave, drawing diagrams on a blackboard, walking through the tactics step by step. He describes the geometry, the timing, the coordination required. He emphasizes that it only works if both pilots commit completely, if they trust each other, absolutely. He mentions, almost casually, that he proposed this maneuver months ago to Naval Command and was rejected. The intelligence officers exchange glances. One of them, a young lieutenant commander, asks why it was rejected. Thatch shrugs. Too complex, they said. Too non-orthodox. Not how American pilots fight. The intelligence officer shakes his head in disbelief. This needs to go up the chain immediately, he says. Every squadron needs to learn this. Thatch nods. That was always the plan. He just had to prove it worked first. By evening, Thatch receives orders to prepare a full tactical report for immediate distribution to all fighter squadrons in the Pacific Fleet. The same command structure that rejected his proposal months ago now demands detailed instructions on how to implement it. There is no apology, no acknowledgement that they were wrong, just urgent orders to document the tactic and distribute it as quickly as possible. Thatch works through the night, writing the report, drawing diagrams, explaining every aspect of the weave. He includes training recommendations, communication protocols, common mistakes to avoid. He writes clearly and precisely, knowing that pilots' lives will depend on understanding these tactics correctly. The Battle of Midway rages for 3 more days. American dive bombers sink 4 Japanese carriers in one of the most decisive naval victories in history. The battle turns the tide of the Pacific War, stopping Japanese expansion and putting America on the path to eventual victory. But in the ready rooms and briefing spaces, pilots are talking about something else. The weave. Thatch's maneuver spreads through the fleet like wildfire. Squadrons that have been suffering devastating losses suddenly have a tool that works. Pilots practice the maneuver between combat missions, on carrier decks, in the air whenever possible. The same commanders who rejected the maneuver months ago now demand that every pilot learn it immediately. Emergency training sessions are conducted. Experienced pilots teach new pilots. The crazy maneuver becomes standard operating procedure almost overnight. The impact is immediate and measurable. In the weeks following Midway, American pilot survival rates increase dramatically. Zeros, which once dominated every engagement, suddenly find themselves vulnerable. Japanese pilots trained for individual combat struggle to counter the coordinated American tactics. They try to adapt, but their doctrine and training are built around exploiting their aircraft's superior maneuverability in one-on-one fights. The weave eliminates that advantage, turning every one-on-one fight into a 2-on-1 ambush. The psychological advantage shifts. American pilots, who once feared encountering Zeros, now engage them with confidence. The kill ratio begins to even out, then tips in America's favor. The Thatch weave does not make the Wildcat a better aircraft, but it makes American pilots more effective than the sum of their individual skills. The tactical revolution extends beyond just the weave itself. The maneuver proves a larger point. That coordination and teamwork can overcome individual disadvantage. That doctrine must adapt to reality, rather than forcing reality to conform to doctrine. The entire American fighter doctrine begins to shift. Training programs are rewritten to emphasize mutual support and coordinated tactics. The lone wolf fighter pilot, the romantic ideal of the individual ace, gives way to a new model. The disciplined team player who trusts his wingman and fights as part of a coordinated unit. It is a fundamental change in military culture, driven by necessity and proven in combat. The change does not happen without resistance. Some old-school pilots and commanders cling to the traditional doctrine, arguing that American pilots should not need such tactics, that individual skill should be sufficient. But the casualty statistics are undeniable. Squadrons that adopt the weave survive. Squadrons that do not suffer higher losses. Eventually, even the most resistant commanders accept the new reality. By the end of 1942, the Thatch Weave is being taught at every naval aviation training facility in the United States. New pilots learn it before they ever see combat, practicing the maneuver until it becomes instinctive. Experienced pilots retrain to incorporate it into their tactics. Variations and adaptations are developed for different situations and aircraft types. Some squadrons develop a four-plane weave, two pairs weaving together to create an even more formidable defensive barrier. Others adapt the basic principle to different scenarios. Bomber escort, ground attack, defensive patrols. The basic principle, two fighters in mutual support creating crossfire against attackers, becomes foundational to American air combat doctrine. And it all traces back to one rejected proposal. One officer's refusal to accept that his pilots had to die. One night with matchsticks on a desk. Thatch himself continues to fly combat missions throughout the war, but his greatest contribution is already made. The maneuver that bears his name saves countless lives. Pilots who survive the war because of the weave number in the hundreds, perhaps thousands. Each of them owes their survival to a tactic that was once dismissed as too complex, too non-orthodox, too crazy. The irony is not lost on Thatch. He is promoted, decorated, celebrated as a tactical genius. The same officers who rejected his proposal now praise his innovation. Admiral Kelly, who told him that American pilots should win through individual excellence, personally pins the Navy Cross on Thatch's chest and calls him one of the finest tactical minds in naval aviation. Thatch accepts the accolades with grace but cannot help feeling bitter about the pilots who died before the maneuver was accepted. The men who might have lived if institutional pride had not delayed its adoption. He thinks about those names, the casualty reports he read in his office, and wonders how many of them could have been saved if command had been willing to listen sooner. After the war, Thatch continues his naval career, rising through the ranks to eventually become an admiral himself. He commands carrier groups, serves in senior staff positions at the Pentagon, and continues to advocate for tactical innovation and realistic training. His reputation as one of naval aviation's greatest minds is secure. But he never forgets the lesson of the weave, that good ideas can come from anywhere, that institutional resistance can be deadly, and that the courage to challenge orthodoxy is sometimes the most important form of bravery. In interviews and speeches, he always credits his wingmen and his squadron, insisting that the weave only worked because of their trust and skill. He remains humble about his achievement, deflecting praise, emphasizing that he was just trying to keep his pilots alive. But history remembers him as the man who changed aerial warfare, the rejected pilot whose crazy idea saved a generation. The Thatch Weave continues to influence fighter tactics long after World War II ends. Modern fighter doctrine still emphasizes mutual support and coordinated maneuvers. The specific pattern that Thatch developed with matchsticks has been superseded by more advanced tactics suited to jet aircraft and missile combat. But the underlying principle remains. Two fighters working together are more than twice as effective as two fighters working alone. Military academies teach the weave as a case study in tactical innovation. It appears in training manuals, historical analyses, and strategic studies. Fighter pilots around the world learn about Thatch and his maneuver, understanding that sometimes the most important innovations come not from technology, but from creative thinking about how to use existing tools more effectively. The broader lesson extends beyond military tactics. The story of the Thatch Weave is a story about innovation in the face of institutional resistance. It is about the courage to propose unconventional solutions to difficult problems, It is about the deadly cost of rejecting new ideas simply because they challenge established doctrine. How many other innovations have been delayed or dismissed because they seem too crazy, too complex, too non-orthodox? How many lives could have been saved? How many problems could have been solved if institutions were more willing to listen to unconventional thinkers? The questions are uncomfortable but necessary. Institutions exist to preserve knowledge and maintain standards, but they can also become obstacles to progress, defending outdated doctrine simply because it is familiar and comfortable. Thach's matchsticks, the simple demonstration that convinced no one in that conference room, eventually convinced an entire military to change how it fought. The maneuver that was too complex for combat became instinctive for thousands of pilots. The tactic that violated established doctrine became the new doctrine. The crazy idea that one rejected pilot refused to abandon became the innovation that made Japanese fighters, once seemingly invincible, suddenly vulnerable. It is a reminder that being right is not enough. You also need the courage to persist when everyone tells you that you are wrong, the determination to prove your idea works, and sometimes the willingness to act without permission when lives are at stake. Thach could have accepted the rejection, could have followed orders and taught conventional tactics, could have avoided the isolation and criticism that came with challenging authority, but he chose to persist, chose to train his squadron in unauthorized tactics, chose to risk his career because he believed he could save lives. December 7, 1941. American pilots faced an enemy they could not beat. June 4, 1942, they found a way to win. The difference was one man's refusal to accept the unacceptable, one simple maneuver developed with matchsticks on a desk, and one moment of validation in the skies over Midway, when the impossible became real. The rejected pilot saved a generation. The crazy maneuver changed warfare, and the lesson endures. Sometimes the ideas that seem most radical are the ones that matter most. Sometimes the voices that challenge orthodoxy are the ones we most need to hear. And sometimes the difference between defeat and victory is one person's stubborn insistence that there has to be a better way, even when everyone else has given up looking for it. If you found this story of innovation, courage, and tactical genius as fascinating as we did, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more incredible untold stories from history. Hit that like button if you believe that challenging the status quo can save lives, and drop a comment below telling us, what other rejected ideas from history do you think we should cover next? Your support helps us bring these amazing stories to light. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our next video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.